The sound of creaking timbers woke Eleanor Preston from a deep sleep, but before she could even open her eyes fully, the entire world came crashing down upon her in an explosion of splintered wood, freezing snow, and suffocating darkness. Florence, Arizona wasn't supposed to get snow like this. The winter of 1883 had been mild up until 3 days ago, when the storm rolled in from the north with a vengeance that nobody had anticipated. Eleanor had watched from her cabin window as the snow piled higher and higher, accumulating on her roof in wet, heavy layers that made the old structure groan and protest. She had thought about trying to clear it, but the storm had been too fierce, the wind too brutal. So she had stayed inside, rationing her firewood and her food, waiting for it to pass. Now she lay trapped beneath what remained of her home, pinned under a massive beam that had fallen across her legs and lower body. The weight was crushing, but not quite enough to break bones. Snow pressed down from above, filtering through the gaps in the debris, covering her face and chest with its icy weight. Eleanor tried to move, tried to shift the beam, but it would not budge. Her breath came in short, panicked gasps that sent small clouds of vapor into the frigid air around her face. She was going to die here, alone, trapped beneath her own roof in a freak snowstorm that never should have happened this far south. Eleanor had come to Arizona territory 3 years ago with her husband, Daniel. They had dreamed of starting fresh, of building a life together, away from the crowded cities back east. Daniel had been a carpenter, skilled with his hands, and he had built this cabin with care and pride. But Daniel was gone now, taken by a fever the previous summer. She had stayed because she had nowhere else to go, no family left, no money to start over somewhere new. The cold was seeping into her bones. She could not feel her feet anymore. Her fingers were growing numb despite being tucked against her body. She tried to call out, but her voice was weak, muffled by the snow and debris. Who would hear her anyway? Her nearest neighbor was nearly 2 miles away, and in this storm nobody would be traveling. Time passed in a strange, disjointed way. Eleanor drifted in and out of consciousness, her body trying to conserve what little warmth remained. She thought of Daniel, of their brief happiness together. She thought of her mother, dead these 10 years now. She thought of all the things she had wanted to do with her life, all the dreams that would die here with her in the wreckage. Then she heard something, a sound that did not belong to the storm or the settling debris. Voices, distant but real. Eleanor tried to cry out again, forcing air through her frozen lungs. "Help!" she managed, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Help me!" The voices grew louder. There was movement above her, the sound of snow being shifted, wood being moved. Hope flared in her chest, painful and bright. "There's someone under here," a man's voice called out, strong and urgent. "I can hear breathing. Get the shovels, quick now." Eleanor tried to respond but found she could not. Her body was shutting down, the cold winning its battle against her will to survive. She felt herself slipping away, consciousness fading like a candle flame in the wind. But the sounds continued. The scraping of shovels, the grunting of effort, the creak and crash of debris being hauled away. Light began to filter through the darkness above her, gray and dim but light nonetheless. Cold air rushed in, even colder than what had surrounded her, and Eleanor gasped. "I see her!" the same voice called. "She's alive! Hold on, miss. We're getting you out." More digging, more movement. Then hands, warm and strong, were touching her face, brushing snow away from her eyes and mouth. Eleanor forced her eyes open and found herself looking up into the most striking face she had ever seen. The man had dark hair plastered to his forehead with melting snow, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of storm clouds. Those eyes were filled with fierce determination and something else, something that looked almost like fear. "Stay with me now," he said, his voice gentler than before. "We're going to get you out, but I need you to stay awake. Can you do that?" Eleanor managed a tiny nod. The man smiled, just a flash of relief across his features, then turned his attention to the beam pinning her down. Marcus, this beam's got her trapped, he called to someone Eleanor could not see. We need to lift it careful. If we shift it wrong, the whole pile could come down on her again. I'm here, Micah, another male voice responded. Let me get positioned on this side. The first man, Micah, looked back down at Eleanor. This might hurt, he warned her, but we have to move fast once we lift this beam. The structure isn't stable. Do you understand? Yes, Eleanor breathed. Good girl. On three, Marcus? 1, 2, 3. The beam lifted. Pain shot through Eleanor's legs as blood rushed back into compressed flesh. She cried out, unable to stop herself. I've got you, Micah said, and then his arms were around her, pulling her free from the debris with surprising gentleness. He lifted her as though she weighed nothing, cradling her against his chest as he navigated carefully through the wreckage of her cabin. Marcus, grab those blankets by the door. She's freezing. Eleanor's head lolled against Micah's shoulder. She could smell leather and horse and wood smoke on him, familiar scents that somehow made her feel safer. His body was warm, radiating heat that her frozen form instinctively pressed toward. My horse is just beyond the tree line, Micah was saying. Your place is closer than town. We need to get her warm now. She's been out here too long. Agreed, Marcus replied. Eleanor caught a glimpse of him, a stocky man with red hair and a concerned expression. The storm's letting up some, but it'll be dark soon. Let's move. They traveled through the snow, Micah carrying her the entire way, while Marcus led his horse and Micah's through the drifts. Eleanor tried to stay conscious, tried to make sense of what was happening, but her body had other ideas. The shock and cold were catching up with her, and darkness kept creeping in at the edges of her vision. Talk to me, Micah said, his breath warm against her hair. Tell me your name. Eleanor, she managed. Eleanor Preston. Eleanor, that's a beautiful name. I'm Micah Harrison. The red-headed fellow cursing at the snow behind us is Marcus Foster. We were heading back from a supply run to Phoenix when the storm hit. Took shelter in an old line shack about 3 miles from here. When the snow let up enough to see, we started making our way toward Florence and saw your cabin had collapsed. Lucky, Eleanor whispered. Yes, you are, Micah agreed, but you're also strong. Not many people could have survived what you just went through. Eleanor wanted to tell him she did not feel strong, that she felt broken and weak and so very tired, but the words would not come. Instead, she let herself sink into the warmth of his arms and the steady rhythm of his stride. She woke briefly when they arrived at what must have been Marcus's homestead. It was a solid house, larger than her cabin had been, with smoke rising from the chimney. A woman came rushing out, her face tight with worry. Lord have mercy, the woman breathed. Is she alive? Barely, Marcus said. Sarah, we need hot water, blankets, anything you can do to warm her up slowly. The woman, Sarah, nodded and disappeared back inside. Micah carried Eleanor through the door and into the blessed warmth of the house. The heat made her skin prickle painfully, sensation returning to frozen flesh. Not too close to the fire yet, Sarah was saying. We need to warm her gradually, or it could do more harm than good. Bring her to the bedroom. I'll get her out of these wet clothes. I'll leave you ladies to it, Micah said. But Eleanor felt a strange panic at the thought of him leaving. Her hand, moving almost of its own accord, clutched at his shirt. Don't go, she heard herself say, the words slurred and desperate. Micah's hand covered hers, warm and steady. I'm just going to be in the next room, he assured her. Sarah will take good care of you. I promise I won't leave the house. His words should not have comforted her as much as they did. Eleanor did not know this man, had only just met him under the worst circumstances imaginable. But something in his voice, in the gentle way he handled her, made her want to trust him. She forced herself to release his shirt and let Sarah take over. The next hours passed in a blur of pain and cold and gradual warming. Sarah was efficient and kind, stripping away Eleanor's frozen clothing and wrapping her in warm, dry blankets. She brought hot broth that Eleanor could barely swallow and warm stones wrapped in cloth to place against her skin. Through it all, Eleanor drifted in and out of awareness, sometimes lucid and sometimes lost in confused dreams where the cabin was still collapsing and she was still trapped beneath the weight of it all. When she finally woke with a clear head, it was night. Firelight danced across the walls of the small bedroom, and Eleanor realized she was lying in an actual bed with real quilts piled on top of her. Her body ached everywhere, a deep bone weariness that made even the thought of moving exhausting. But she was warm. She was alive. The door opened quietly, and Eleanor turned her head to see Micah entering with a cup in his hands. He seemed surprised to find her awake, but a smile crossed his face, transforming his features from merely handsome to something that made Eleanor's heart skip in her chest. "You're back with us," he said, his voice low and pleased. "How are you feeling?" "Like a roof fell on me," Eleanor managed, and was rewarded with a soft laugh. "Fair enough." Micah approached the bed and settled into a chair someone had placed beside it. "Sarah made more broth. Think you can manage some?" Eleanor nodded, and Micah helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back with careful hands. When he brought the cup to her lips, she took it herself, needing to prove she was not completely helpless, though her hands shook with the effort. "Take it slow," Micah advised, watching her with those storm-gray eyes. "You've been unconscious for most of the day. Your body's been through a lot." Eleanor sipped the broth, feeling its warmth spread through her chest and stomach. It was good, rich with vegetables and some kind of meat. She had not realized how hungry she was until the first taste hit her tongue. "What time is it?" she asked between sips. "Near midnight. Sarah and Marcus turned in about an hour ago. I told them I'd keep watch. Make sure you didn't need anything." He paused, then added with a slight curve of his lips, "And to make sure you didn't try to get up and do something foolish like walk around on legs that were trapped under a beam for God knows how long." "How did you know I was thinking about that?" Eleanor asked, and was surprised to find she was almost smiling herself. "Lucky guess." Micah leaned back in the chair, looking more relaxed than he had earlier. "Truth is, you seem like the type who doesn't like being helpless. Am I right?" Eleanor considered this. "I've had to take care of myself for a while now," she admitted. "My husband passed last summer. It's been just me since then." Something flickered in Micah's expression, sympathy mixed with understanding. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and the words sounded genuine rather than simply polite. "That must have been hard." It was. Eleanor stared down into her cup, watching the liquid shimmer in the firelight. Daniel was a good man, kind, gentle. We came out here together, full of dreams about building something new. And then he got sick, and in less than a week he was gone. The doctor said it was his lungs, some kind of infection. There was nothing anyone could do. "And you stayed," Micah observed, "even after losing him. Why?" It was a fair question, one Eleanor had asked herself many times over the long, lonely months. "I had nowhere else to go," she said simply. "No family left back east, no money to travel or start over. The cabin was paid for. The land was ours. It seemed easier to stay and try to make a life here than to run away from everything Daniel and I had built together." Micah nodded slowly. "That takes courage. Or stupidity," Eleanor said with a bitter laugh. "Given that I nearly died when my own roof caved in on me. That wasn't stupidity. That was a freak storm that nobody could have predicted. The folks in Florence have been saying they've never seen snow like this, not in all the years they've lived here. You couldn't have known it would get that bad." Eleanor finished the broth and handed the empty cup back to Micah. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, and she felt a jolt of something she could not quite name. Awareness, perhaps. Or simply the reminder that she was alive, that she could still feel things beyond cold and pain. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for digging me out, for bringing me here. You saved my life." Micah set the cup aside and met her eyes directly. I'm glad we came along when we did, he said. I don't like to think about what would have happened if we hadn't. I would have died, Eleanor said bluntly, frozen to death or suffocated under the snow. There's no need to dance around it. No, Micah agreed. I suppose there isn't. But you didn't die, Eleanor. You're here and you're going to recover, and you're going to have a chance to figure out what comes next. What came next? Eleanor had not thought that far ahead. She had been so focused on simple survival day by day that the idea of a future felt strange and distant. My cabin is destroyed, she said, the reality settling over her like a weight. Everything I own was in there. My clothes, my supplies, Daniel's tools, all of it buried under snow and broken wood. We'll go back when you're healed, Micah said. See what can be salvaged. And Sarah and Marcus will let you stay here as long as you need. They're good people. They won't turn you out. I can't impose on them indefinitely, Eleanor protested. They don't even know me. Then you'll get to know each other. And when you're strong enough, we'll figure out a plan. Micah leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his expression serious. You don't have to have all the answers tonight, Eleanor. Tonight, you just need to rest and heal. Everything else can wait. The certainty in his voice was comforting, even if Eleanor was not sure she believed him. But she was tired, so tired, and the bed was warm, and Micah was right there, solid and real, and somehow reassuring in a way she had not felt since Daniel died. Will you still be here tomorrow? She found herself asking. Micah's expression softened. I'll be here as long as you need me to be, he promised. I've got nowhere pressing to go. Marcus has been after me to stay and help him with some projects around the homestead, so I might as well make myself useful while you recover. You don't know me, Eleanor said, echoing her earlier words, but with a different meaning now. Why would you stay for someone you don't know? Micah was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made Eleanor's breath catch. I don't know, he finally admitted. But when I pulled you out of that wreckage, when I saw you were alive, something shifted in me. Maybe it's because I know what it's like to lose everything. Maybe it's because you deserve someone in your corner after all you've been through. Or maybe I just want to get to know the woman who survived something that would have killed most people. He paused, then added with a slight smile. Is that reason enough? Eleanor felt tears prick at her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She had not cried when Daniel died, had held herself together through the funeral and the long, empty days that followed. But now, lying in a stranger's bed, with another stranger offering her kindness she had not asked for, the tears came despite her best efforts to hold them back. Hey now, Micah said gently, reaching out to brush a tear from her cheek with his thumb. What's this? I'm sorry, Eleanor managed. I don't know why I'm crying. I never cry. You've been through hell today, Micah said. I'd say you've earned the right to a few tears. Eleanor shook her head, trying to pull herself together. You must think I'm pathetic. I think you're human, Micah corrected. And I think you've been holding yourself together for a long time, trying to be strong because you didn't have any other choice. Well, now you do have a choice. You can let yourself feel what you're feeling, and you don't have to be strong every single moment. The words broke something loose inside Eleanor, and the tears came harder. Micah did not try to stop them or tell her to calm down. He simply moved from the chair to sit on the edge of the bed, and when Eleanor instinctively reached for him, he pulled her into his arms and let her cry against his chest. He held her carefully, mindful of her injuries, one hand stroking her hair while the other rubbed small circles on her back. It's all right, he murmured. I've got you. You're safe now. Eleanor cried until she had no more tears left, until she was hiccuping and exhausted and feeling strangely lighter than she had in months. When she finally pulled back, embarrassed by the wet spot she had left on Micah's shirt, he just smiled at her and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Feel better? He asked. Oddly, yes, Eleanor admitted. She wiped at her face with shaking hands. I must look a mess. You look like someone who's been through something difficult and came out the other side, Micah said. That's nothing to be ashamed of. Eleanor studied his face, this man who had appeared out of nowhere to save her life and was now holding her while she fell apart. He was younger than Daniel had been, she realized, probably in his late 20s. There was a roughness to him, a hardness born of the frontier life, but also a gentleness that surprised her. How old are you? She asked, the question slipping out before she could stop it. Micah raised an eyebrow, amused. 28. Why? Just wondering. I'm 25. I was just thinking you seem young to be traveling alone, doing supply runs between towns. I've been on my own since I was 16, Micah said. My parents died of cholera when I was 15. Spent a year with an uncle who didn't particularly want me, then struck out on my own. I've been drifting ever since, picking up work where I can find it. Cattle drives, ranch hand positions, odd jobs. The supply run was just the latest. Marcus knew I needed the money, and he needed someone he could trust to make the trip with him. That's a hard life, Eleanor said softly. It's the only life I've known, Micah replied with a shrug. But I can't say I haven't thought about settling down somewhere, finding a place to call home. It gets lonely, always moving from town to town, never putting down roots. Is that why you want to stay here? Eleanor asked. Are you hoping Marcus will offer you permanent work? Maybe, Micah admitted. Or maybe I'm just not ready to walk away from you yet. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that Eleanor was not sure she was ready to examine. But her heart was beating faster, and when Micah's hand found hers beneath the blankets, she did not pull away. You should rest, he said after a moment, his voice rougher than before. It's late and your body needs sleep to heal. Will you stay? Eleanor asked, then immediately felt foolish. I mean, in the chair, just until I fall asleep. I don't want to be alone right now. Of course, Micah said without hesitation. He helped her lie back down, tucking the blankets around her with gentle efficiency, then returned to the chair. I'll be right here. Sleep, Eleanor. She closed her eyes, exhausted beyond measure, but before sleep claimed her, she heard Micah's voice, soft and tender in the darkness. You're going to be all right. I promise you that. Eleanor wanted to believe him, and as she drifted off, she found that maybe, just maybe she did. The days that followed fell into a gentle rhythm. Sarah proved to be exactly as kind as Micah had promised, fussing over Eleanor with a maternal concern that both touched and embarrassed her. Marcus was gruff but warm, checking in on her progress with genuine interest, and Micah was a constant presence, helping her when she needed it and giving her space when she did not, always seeming to know exactly what she required. Eleanor's legs had been badly bruised but not broken, a fact that everyone agreed was a miracle. The doctor who came out from Florence 2 days after the collapse confirmed this and declared that with rest and careful movement, she should recover fully. The frostbite on her fingers and toes was minor, the damage minimal thanks to how quickly Micah and Marcus had gotten her to warmth. You're a lucky woman, Mrs. Preston, the doctor told her. A few more hours, and we'd be having a very different conversation. I know, Eleanor said quietly, glancing at Micah, who stood near the door watching the examination with concerned eyes. I owe my life to Mr. Harrison and Mr. Foster. Indeed you do, the doctor agreed. He packed up his bag and gave Eleanor a stern look. No trying to walk for at least another week. Keep those legs elevated as much as possible, and don't push yourself too hard too fast. The body heals in its own time. After the doctor left, Micah brought Eleanor lunch, a hearty stew that Sarah had made. He had taken to eating his meals with her, keeping her company while she was confined to bed. Eleanor found herself looking forward to these moments, to the easy conversation that flowed between them. Tell me about your travels, she said as they ate. You've been all over the territory. What's it like? Micah considered this, chewing thoughtfully. Beautiful in a harsh sort of way. Arizona's not like anywhere else I've been. The deserts, the mountains, the way the sky looks at sunset. It gets under your skin, but it's also unforgiving. Water's scarce in most places. The heat in summer can kill you, and there's always the threat of Apache raids in some areas, though things have been quieter since Geronimo was captured a few years back. Do you have a favorite place? Eleanor asked. There's a spot up near the Mogollon Rim, Micah said, his eyes distant with memory. All pine forests and cool air, even in summer. Feels like a different world from the desert. I worked on a ranch up there for a season, and I've never forgotten it. Thought maybe someday I'd go back, try to make a life there. Why didn't you? Micah shrugged. Never had a reason to stay in one place. No family, no ties. It seemed easier to keep moving. He looked at her then, his gaze direct. Maybe I was just waiting for a reason to stop. Eleanor's heart skipped at the implication in his words. She set down her spoon, suddenly not hungry. Micah, you can't just upend your life because you pulled me out of a collapsed cabin. You don't owe me anything beyond what you've already done. What if it's not about owing? Micah asked. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. Eleanor, I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other a few days, but I can't remember the last time I felt this strongly about wanting to stay somewhere, to be near someone. You make me want things I thought I'd given up on. What things? Eleanor whispered. A home, stability, someone to build a life with. Micah reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. Someone to care about who cares about me in return. Eleanor's mind was racing. Part of her wanted to pull away, to protect herself from the vulnerability of letting someone in. She had loved Daniel, had built a life with him, and losing him had nearly destroyed her. The thought of opening herself up to that kind of pain again was terrifying. But another part of her, a part that had been slowly growing stronger since the moment Micah pulled her from the wreckage, wanted to lean in, to take the risk, to let herself feel something other than grief and loneliness. I'm scared, she admitted. I lost Daniel, and it broke something in me. I don't know if I can go through that again. I can't promise you'll never lose me, Micah said honestly. Life doesn't come with guarantees, but I can promise that I'll be here as long as I have breath in my body. I can promise that I'll do everything in my power to build something good with you if you'll let me. And I can promise that you won't be alone anymore, not if you don't want to be. Eleanor looked into his storm-gray eyes and saw nothing but sincerity. This man, this near stranger who had become so important to her so quickly, was offering her a future. It was terrifying and exhilarating and completely unexpected. I don't know what to say, she breathed. Say you'll give this a chance, Micah urged. Give us a chance. We can take it slow, let things develop naturally. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow. I'm just asking you not to shut me out because you're afraid. Eleanor thought about the long, lonely months since Daniel's death, the empty cabin, the endless silence, the slow erosion of hope that anything would ever be good again. And then she thought about the past few days, about Micah's steady presence and gentle care, about the way she felt alive when he was near, about the possibility of something new and bright on the horizon. All right, she said, the words both a surrender and a beginning. All right, let's see where this goes. The smile that broke across Micah's face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. You won't regret this, he said. I swear it. Eleanor hoped he was right. The week of bed rest passed slowly, but Eleanor found she did not mind as much as she thought she would. Micah was with her constantly, reading to her from the books Sarah provided, playing cards when she grew bored, telling her stories about his travels that made her laugh and wonder in equal measure. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and preferences and dreams. Eleanor told him about growing up in Boston, the daughter of a school teacher and a seamstress. She described the crowded streets and the harsh winters, the way she had always felt constrained by the expectations placed on proper young ladies. Meeting Daniel had been a chance to escape, to forge a new path west where anything seemed possible. Micah listened to all of it with careful attention, asking questions that showed he truly cared about understanding her. In turn, he shared more about his own childhood, about growing up on a small farm in Missouri before disease stole his parents and set him adrift. He spoke of the loneliness of the drifter's life, the way he had learned to rely only on himself because there was nobody else. "I think that's why I noticed you," he said one afternoon as they sat together, Eleanor now able to sit up in a chair by the window. "When I saw your cabin standing alone out there, away from town with no other houses nearby, it reminded me of myself, isolated, trying to be strong enough to handle everything alone. Were we both just fooling ourselves?" Eleanor asked. "Maybe," Micah admitted. "Or maybe we were doing what we had to do until something better came along." By the time the doctor returned and declared Eleanor well enough to start moving around, the connection between her and Micah had deepened into something undeniable. There was an ease between them, a natural compatibility that made Eleanor believe that perhaps fate had played a role in Micah being on that particular road at that particular time. The first time she walked outside, leaning on Micah's arm for support, the world felt new. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by snow. The sun was bright overhead, reflecting off the white expanse in a way that made Eleanor squint. But it was beautiful, this harsh land, softened by winter's touch. "How does it feel to be on your feet again?" Micah asked. "Strange," Eleanor admitted. "Good, but strange, like I'm learning how to walk all over again." They made slow circuits around the yard, Micah patient as Eleanor regained her strength and confidence. Marcus and Sarah watched from the porch, both smiling at the sight of the couple moving together in quiet harmony. "Those two are good for each other," Sarah said, loud enough for Eleanor to hear. "Mark my words, Marcus, we're going to be attending a wedding before spring." Eleanor felt her cheeks heat, but Micah just laughed and called back, "You might be right about that, Sarah." That evening, when they were alone again, Eleanor brought up the question that had been nagging at her. "What about my land, my cabin? Even if it's destroyed, the property is still mine. I can't just abandon it." "We'll go look at it tomorrow if you feel up to it," Micah said. "See what the damage actually is and what can be salvaged. Then we'll make a plan based on what we find." The trip to Eleanor's property the next day was sobering. The cabin was a total loss, collapsed under the weight of snow and ice into little more than a pile of broken timber. Snow still covered much of the wreckage, making it impossible to dig through, but what Eleanor could see confirmed her worst fears. "Everything's gone," she said quietly, staring at what had been her home. "Daniel's tools, our furniture, my clothes, all of it." Micah squeezed her hand. "We'll come back in spring when the snow melts. There might be more that survived than you think, and the land is still good. We could rebuild, if that's what you want." "Rebuild?" Eleanor turned to look at him. "That would take money I don't have. Materials, time." "I have some money saved," Micah said. "Not a lot, but enough to make a start, and I'm handy with tools and construction. Marcus would help too, and probably some of the other folks from Florence once word gets around. People out here look after their own." Eleanor wanted to protest that she was not his responsibility, but the words died in her throat. Because the truth was, she wanted this. She wanted to rebuild not just her home but her life, and she wanted to do it with Micah by her side. "If we did this," she said slowly, "if we rebuilt together, it wouldn't just be my cabin anymore. It would be ours. You understand that, don't you?" Micah's eyes lit up with understanding and joy. "Is that your way of saying you want a future with me?" "Yes," Eleanor said, the words simple but weighted with everything she felt. "Yes, I want a future with you, Micah Harrison. I want to rebuild my cabin into our home. I want to see what we can make of this life together." Micah pulled her into his arms, holding her close despite the cold and the ruins surrounding them. I love you, Eleanor Preston, he said, the words fierce and sure. I know it's fast. I know we haven't known each other long, but I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face, but they were happy tears this time. I love you too, she whispered. I didn't think I could feel this way again, but I do. I love you. When Micah kissed her, it was gentle and reverent, a promise sealed against her lips. Eleanor kissed him back, pouring everything she felt into the gesture. Hope, joy, love, the future unfurling before them like a map waiting to be filled in. They returned to Marcus and Sarah's house with plans already forming. Micah would take work in Florence over the winter, saving money and gathering materials. When spring came and the snow melted, they would begin construction on a new cabin, bigger and sturdier than the one that had collapsed. And somewhere in between, when the time felt right, they would marry and make their partnership official. Sarah was delighted by the news, immediately starting to plan a wedding that Eleanor insisted did not need to be elaborate. Just something small, Eleanor protested, with close friends, nothing fancy. Nonsense, Sarah declared. You're getting married, and that's cause for celebration. We'll do it here, in our yard, come spring when the wildflowers are blooming. It'll be beautiful, you'll see. The winter months that followed were some of the happiest of Eleanor's life. She and Micah fell into a rhythm, working together and building their future one day at a time. Micah found steady work with a freight company in Florence, hauling supplies and goods between towns. The pay was decent, and he was able to save a good portion of it toward their building fund. Eleanor, for her part, took work with a local seamstress, using skills her mother had taught her to mend clothing and create simple garments. The money she earned was added to their savings, and she felt proud to be contributing to their shared dream. In the evenings, they would sit together by the fire in Marcus and Sarah's main room, making plans and talking about the future. Micah sketched out ideas for the cabin, incorporating Eleanor's suggestions and desires. They wanted a larger main room with a proper kitchen area, a bedroom that would be spacious and warm, and a loft that could eventually serve as space for children if they were blessed with them. What do you think about a porch? Micah asked one night, showing Eleanor his latest drawing. One that wraps around the front and side so you could sit out in the morning with coffee and watch the sunrise. I think that sounds perfect, Eleanor said, tracing the lines with her finger. Daniel always said he'd build me a porch like that, but we never got around to it. I'd love to have that now. Micah brought her hand to his lips, kissing her palm. Then you'll have it. I'll make sure of it. They set the wedding date for late April, when Sarah promised the desert would be in full bloom. Eleanor used her seamstress skills to create a simple but beautiful dress, cream-colored with delicate embroidery on the bodice. Sarah helped her, the two women growing close as they worked together. You know, I wondered if you'd ever find happiness again, Sarah admitted one afternoon as they sewed. After Daniel died, you seemed so lost, but Micah brought you back to life. It's beautiful to see. I didn't think I deserved to be happy again, Eleanor confessed. It felt like a betrayal of Daniel's memory, but Micah helped me understand that Daniel would want me to live, to find joy again. Loving Micah doesn't mean I love Daniel any less. It just means my heart is big enough to hold both of them. Sarah reached over and squeezed her hand. That's a wise way to look at it. And you're right, love doesn't diminish because we find it again. It multiplies. As winter gave way to early spring, the snow on Eleanor's property finally melted enough to allow them to assess the damage fully. They spent several weekends salvaging what they could from the wreckage. Much was destroyed, but they managed to recover some of Daniel's tools, a few pieces of furniture that had survived relatively intact, and a small chest containing Eleanor's personal belongings, including her mother's jewelry and some letters from her childhood. This is more than I hoped for, Eleanor said, clutching the chest to her chest. I thought everything was lost. Things have a way of surviving, Micah said, just like people. With the salvaged materials and the money they had saved, They hired a crew of workers from Florence and began construction on the new cabin in early March. Micah worked alongside the crew every day, his skill with carpentry becoming evident as the structure took shape. Marcus helped when he could, and even Sarah contributed by organizing meals for the workers and keeping everyone supplied with fresh water and coffee. Eleanor watched it all with a sense of wonder. This was not just a cabin rising from the ruins of her old life. It was a symbol of resilience, of second chances, of the ability to build something new even after everything had fallen apart. By the first week of April, the cabin was nearly complete. The walls stood strong, the roof was secure, and the porch Micah had promised was even better than Eleanor had imagined. Inside, the rooms were spacious and filled with light from the windows Micah had carefully installed. "What do you think?" he asked, watching nervously as Eleanor walked through their new home for the first time. "It's perfect," Eleanor breathed. "Micah, it's absolutely perfect." He grinned and pulled her close. "Wait until you see the surprise I have for you." He led her to the bedroom, where Eleanor stopped short at the sight before her. There, against one wall, stood a beautiful wooden bed frame, intricately carved with patterns of flowers and vines. It was clearly handmade, the work of someone with true skill and care. "You made this?" Eleanor asked, her voice choked with emotion. "I've been working on it in Marcus's barn whenever I had spare time," Micah admitted. "I wanted you to have something special, something that was just for us and no one else." Eleanor ran her hands over the smooth wood, marveling at the detail. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." "Just like you," Micah said softly, coming to stand behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "Eleanor, in 2 weeks we're getting married. In 2 weeks this will truly be our home and we'll start our life together as husband and wife. I can't wait for that day." "Neither can I," Eleanor said, turning in his arms to face him. She cupped his face in her hands, looking into those gray eyes she had come to love so much. "Thank you for not giving up on me. Thank you for seeing something worth saving when I was trapped under that roof." "Thank you for surviving," Micah countered. "Thank you for being brave enough to take a chance on someone like me." They kissed in the empty bedroom, surrounded by the promise of all the moments they would share there. Eleanor felt a completeness she had not known was possible, a sense that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The wedding day arrived with perfect weather. The sky was a brilliant blue, unmarred by clouds, and the temperature was warm but not hot. Sarah had been right about the wildflowers. The desert around Marcus and Sarah's property had exploded into bloom, carpets of orange and yellow and purple stretching as far as the eye could see. Sarah and a few women from Florence had decorated the yard with simple but beautiful touches. Wildflowers filled jars and vases, ribbons hung from the porch posts, and chairs borrowed from the church were arranged in neat rows for the guests. The guest list was small, just as Eleanor had wanted. Marcus and Sarah, of course, and the handful of neighbors and friends they had made during their time in Florence. The doctor who had treated Eleanor was there, along with the seamstress Eleanor had worked for and the owner of the freight company who employed Micah. The preacher from Florence's small church officiated, a kind older man who had been happy to perform the ceremony. Eleanor stood beside Micah under an arch covered in wildflowers, her hand clasped in his, and listened as the preacher spoke about love and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. "Do you, Micah Harrison, take Eleanor Preston to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Micah said, his voice strong and sure. "And do you, Eleanor Preston, take Micah Harrison to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Eleanor looked into Micah's eyes and saw her entire future reflected there. "I do," she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "Then by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Micah, you may kiss your bride." Micah did not hesitate. He pulled Eleanor close and kissed her with a passion that made several of the guests chuckle and cheer. Eleanor kissed him back, her arms wrapping around his neck, not caring who was watching. This was her husband, her partner, her love. This was the man who had saved her life and then shown her how to truly live again. The celebration that followed was joyful and lively. Sarah had prepared a feast, and Marcus broke out a bottle of whiskey he had been saving for a special occasion. There was music and dancing and laughter that echoed across the desert landscape. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Micah took Eleanor's hand and led her away from the party. They walked together toward their cabin, visible in the distance, and Eleanor felt a surge of pure happiness. "Ready to start our new life, Mrs. Harrison?" Micah asked. "More than ready," Eleanor replied, squeezing his hand. "Let's go home." Their cabin was warm and welcoming when they entered. Micah had lit the lamps earlier, and soft light filled the rooms. The bed he had made for them was outfitted with new quilts that Sarah had given them as a wedding present, and the whole space felt like theirs in a way that was both thrilling and comforting. Micah closed the door behind them and drew Eleanor into his arms. "I love you," he said, the words a vow all their own. "I love you too," Eleanor whispered. "Now and always." They came together as husband and wife, their union a celebration of everything they had survived and everything they hoped to build. Eleanor had never felt more alive, more connected to another person, more certain that she was exactly where she belonged. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the bed Micah had built, Eleanor traced patterns on his chest and marveled at how much her life had changed. 5 months ago, she had been alone and hopeless, trapped under the ruins of her old life. Now she was married to a man she loved desperately, starting fresh in a home they had built together. "What are you thinking?" Micah asked, his voice sleepy and content. "I'm thinking about how lucky I am," Eleanor said, "how close I came to dying, and how you gave me a second chance at everything." "We gave each other a second chance," Micah corrected. "I was drifting before I met you, Eleanor. No purpose, no direction. You gave me something to build toward, something to care about beyond just surviving day to day." "Then we're both lucky," Eleanor said, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. "Yeah," Micah agreed, pulling her closer. "We really are." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, Eleanor felt completely at peace. The months that followed their wedding were filled with hard work and simple joy. Micah continued his work with the freight company, while Eleanor took on more seamstress projects from home, building a small but steady client base. Together, they worked on finishing the interior of their cabin, adding personal touches that made it truly theirs. Eleanor planted a garden in the spring, vegetables and herbs that would help sustain them through the year. Micah built her a chicken coop and brought home 4 hens that provided fresh eggs. They acquired a cow for milk and a couple of goats that Eleanor found endlessly entertaining with their antics. Life was not always easy. The summer heat was brutal, and there were times when money was tight. But they faced everything together, supporting each other through the challenges and celebrating the victories, no matter how small. In late August, Eleanor realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another few weeks to be sure, not wanting to get her hopes up, but when the symptoms persisted, she made a trip to see the doctor in Florence. He confirmed what she had suspected. She was pregnant, about 2 months along if his calculations were correct. Eleanor rode home in a daze, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. A baby. She and Micah were going to have a baby. The news was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. Micah was working on repairing a section of fence when Eleanor arrived home. He looked up at the sound of her horse and immediately set down his tools, his expression concerned. "Everything all right?" he called. "You were gone longer than I expected." Eleanor dismounted and walked to him on shaking legs. She did not know how to say it, how to share this enormous news, so she just blurted it out. "I'm pregnant." Micah's eyes went wide. He stared at her for a long moment, as if processing the words, And then a grin spread across his face that was so bright it rivaled the sun overhead. "You're pregnant?" he repeated as if needing confirmation. "Yes," Eleanor said, starting to smile herself. "The doctor confirmed it. We're going to have a baby, Micah." He let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests to be careful. When he set her down, his hands immediately went to her stomach, pressing gently as if he could already feel the life growing there. "A baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Eleanor asked, suddenly needing to hear him say it. "Happy?" Micah cupped her face in his hands, his eyes bright with emotion. "Eleanor, I'm more than happy. I'm overjoyed. I'm terrified and excited and so grateful I can barely stand it. We're going to be parents." Eleanor felt tears slip down her cheeks, happy tears that seemed to come so easily these days. "I was so scared to hope," she admitted. "After everything we've been through, I was afraid something would go wrong. But the doctor says everything looks good. The baby should arrive in late February or early March." "Then we have time to prepare," Micah said practically, though his grin had not dimmed. "We'll need to set up the loft as a nursery. And you should stop taking on so much heavy work. I'll talk to Marcus, see if he needs help with anything around his place for extra money. We want to make sure you and the baby have everything you need." "Micah, I'm pregnant, not dying," Eleanor said with a laugh. "I can still work." "I know, but I want to take care of you," Micah insisted. "Both of you. Let me do this, Eleanor. Let me be the husband and father I want to be." Eleanor softened at his earnest expression. "All right," she agreed. "We'll take care of each other, like we always do." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall and into winter. Eleanor's belly grew, and with it Micah's protectiveness and excitement. He was constantly thinking of ways to make her more comfortable, building her a rocking chair for the main room, ensuring they had plenty of firewood for the winter, stocking up on supplies so she would not have to make trips to town as her condition advanced. Sarah was thrilled by the news and took Eleanor under her wing, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. She and Marcus had not been blessed with children of their own, and Sarah admitted that being part of Eleanor and Micah's journey to parenthood brought her great joy. "You're like the daughter I never had," Sarah told Eleanor one afternoon as they worked together on sewing baby clothes. "And this little one will be like a grandchild to Marcus and me. I hope you know that." "We'd be honored," Eleanor said warmly. "You and Marcus have been family to us from the beginning. This baby will be lucky to have you in their life." As winter settled in, Eleanor found herself thinking often about the previous year, about the storm that had collapsed her cabin and brought Micah into her life. It was strange how something so traumatic had ultimately led to so much happiness. If the roof had not fallen, if Micah had not been traveling that particular road at that particular time, her life would be completely different now. "Do you ever think about that day?" she asked Micah one evening as they sat together by the fire, his hand resting on her swollen belly. "The day you found me?" "All the time," Micah admitted. "I think about how close I came to losing you before I even knew you. How, if we had left the line shack an hour earlier or later, if we had taken a different route, I might never have seen your cabin. It makes me believe in fate, I guess, that some things are just meant to be." "I believe that too," Eleanor said. She took his hand and moved it to where the baby was kicking, watching his face light up with wonder as he felt the movement. "All of this was meant to be. You, me, this baby, our life together. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you never regret choosing this life," Micah said seriously. "I know I'm not rich. I know I can't give you fancy things or an easy life, but I promise you, Eleanor, I will love you and our children with everything I have. That will never change." "That's all I need," Eleanor assured him. "All I've ever needed. Your love, your partnership, your presence. Everything else is just details." The baby arrived on a cold night in late February. Eleanor's labor began in the early evening, and by midnight, Sarah and the midwife from Florence were both at the cabin, helping Eleanor through the intense waves of pain and effort. Micah stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand and offering words of encouragement, even when Eleanor was certain she could not endure another moment. But she did endure, drawing on reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. When the baby finally emerged with a strong, healthy cry, Eleanor felt a rush of love so powerful it took her breath away. The midwife cleaned the infant quickly and placed the baby in Eleanor's arms. "It's a boy," the midwife announced with a smile. "A beautiful, healthy boy." Eleanor stared down at her son, at his tiny, perfect features and the way his little fists waved in the air. He had dark hair like Micah and eyes that would probably settle to some shade of brown or gray in time. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. "Micah, look," she whispered. "Look at our son." Micah, who had tears streaming down his face, leaned over to get a better view. "He's beautiful," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Eleanor, he's perfect." "What should we name him?" Eleanor asked. They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy, but had never quite settled on one. Now looking at her son, Eleanor knew exactly what felt right. "Matthew," she said. "Matthew Daniel Harrison, after your father's name and my late husband's, to honor where we came from while celebrating where we are now." Micah pressed a kiss to her forehead, then to the baby's. "Matthew Daniel Harrison," he repeated. "I love it. Hello, Matthew. Welcome to the world, son." The weeks after Matthew's birth were exhausting, but filled with a joy Eleanor had never imagined. She spent her days learning to care for her son, nursing him and changing him and marveling at every tiny sound and movement he made. Micah was a devoted father, taking on extra responsibilities around the house so Eleanor could focus on the baby and her recovery. "You're a natural at this," Eleanor told him one evening as she watched him rock Matthew to sleep, singing a soft lullaby in a surprisingly good voice. "I'm just doing what feels right," Micah said. "Though I won't lie, he terrifies me a little. He's so small and fragile. What if I do something wrong?" "You won't," Eleanor assured him. "You're a wonderful father, Micah. Matthew is lucky to have you." As spring arrived and the desert bloomed once more, Eleanor reflected on how much her life had transformed. It had been just over a year since the roof collapse, since Micah had dug her out of the snow and saved her life. In that time, she had fallen in love, gotten married, built a new home, and become a mother. The grief she carried for Daniel would never fully disappear, but it had transformed into something gentler, a bittersweet memory rather than an open wound. One afternoon, as Eleanor sat on the porch Micah had built for her, watching him work in the garden while Matthew slept in a basket beside her, she felt overwhelmingly grateful. Her life was not perfect. They still struggled financially at times, the work was hard, and the Arizona territory could be harsh and unforgiving. But she had love. She had family. She had a partner who stood beside her through everything. She had survived something that should have killed her and found a way not just to live, but to thrive. "What are you smiling about?" Micah called, noticing her expression. "Just thinking about how happy I am," Eleanor called back. "How lucky we are." Micah set down his tools and came to join her on the porch, sitting beside her and pulling her close. "We are lucky," he agreed, "though I prefer to think we made our own luck. We chose to take a chance on each other, to build something together. That wasn't luck. That was courage." "Maybe it was both," Eleanor suggested. Matthew began to fuss, and Eleanor lifted him from the basket, settling him against her shoulder. Micah reached over to stroke the baby's back, and the three of them sat together in the warm spring sunshine, a family complete and content. The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs. The freight company Micah worked for expanded, and he was promoted to a route supervisor position that paid better and kept him closer to home. Eleanor's seamstress business grew as well, and she became known throughout Florence for her skill and fair prices. They added to their homestead gradually. Micah built a proper barn for the animals they acquired, and Eleanor expanded her garden each year. They saved money carefully, always thinking about the future and what they wanted to provide for Matthew and any other children they might have. When Matthew was 2 years old, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was less of a shock and more of a joyful confirmation of their growing family. Their second child, a daughter they named Emma Grace, arrived in the autumn of 1886. She had Eleanor's blonde hair and Micah's gray eyes, and Matthew was enchanted with his baby sister from the moment he met her. Gentle, Eleanor reminded him as he tried to pat Emma's head with enthusiasm. She's very small. Baby, Matthew said, one of his first words, and Micah and Eleanor laughed at the pride in his voice. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Micah proved to be as devoted to Emma as he was to Matthew, sharing the nighttime duties with Eleanor and taking both children on adventures around the property as they grew older. Eleanor watched her children play in the yard where Daniel's cabin had once stood and felt at peace with the way her life had unfolded. Marcus and Sarah remained close friends, and as they aged, Eleanor and Micah made sure to check on them regularly and help with tasks that became more difficult. When Sarah fell ill in the spring of 1888, Eleanor spent weeks at her bedside, caring for her with the same devotion Sarah had shown when Eleanor had been trapped under the collapsed roof. "You've been such a blessing to us," Sarah whispered one afternoon, her hand weak in Eleanor's. "You and Micah and those beautiful children. Thank you for letting us be part of your family." "You'll always be part of our family," Eleanor assured her, tears streaming down her face. "Always." Sarah passed peacefully a few days later, with Marcus, Eleanor, and Micah all at her side. They buried her on the property she had loved, and Marcus never quite recovered from the loss. He lived another year before joining his beloved wife, and Eleanor and Micah made sure he was not alone in his final days. They inherited Marcus and Sarah's homestead, as the couple had no other family. It was both a gift and a responsibility, and after much discussion, Eleanor and Micah decided to keep the property, but rent it to a young couple just starting out, much as they had once been helped. "It's what Marcus and Sarah would have wanted," Eleanor said, "to give someone else the chance they gave us." As Matthew grew into a bright, curious boy, and Emma became a toddler with a stubborn streak that reminded Eleanor of herself, their little family thrived. Micah had long since stopped his drifting ways, deeply rooted now in the life they had built. He still occasionally talked about the Mogollon Rim, about the pine forests and cool air, and Eleanor made a mental note that perhaps someday they could take a family trip there. In 1889, Eleanor found herself pregnant for a third time. This pregnancy was harder than the previous two, and she spent the last months on bed rest, worried but determined. When their third child arrived in early 1890, it was another boy, healthy and strong despite the difficult pregnancy. "What should we name him?" Micah asked, cradling his new son with practiced ease. Eleanor thought for a moment, then smiled. Marcus Samuel Harrison, to honor the man who gave us so much." Micah's eyes grew damp. "He would have loved that," he said quietly. "Marcus it is." Matthew, now 6 years old, took his role as big brother seriously, helping Eleanor with both Emma and baby Marcus. He was gentle and patient, qualities that Eleanor attributed to watching how Micah treated his family. "You're raising him right," Eleanor told Micah one evening as they watched Matthew carefully rock Marcus's cradle while Emma played with her dolls nearby. "All of them. They're good children." "They have a good mother," Micah said, wrapping his arm around her waist. "And they see every day what love and partnership look like. That's the best education we could give them." As the 19th century drew to a close and the new one approached, Eleanor sometimes thought back to that desperate woman trapped under a collapsed roof in the freak snowstorm of 1883. That woman had been alone and afraid, certain her life was over. She could never have imagined then what her future would hold. The cabin Micah built had stood strong through all the years and all the storms. a testament to his skill and their love. The porch where Eleanor spent countless hours watching her children play had become her favorite place in the world. The land that had once seemed cursed had transformed into a thriving homestead full of life and laughter. On their 10th wedding anniversary in April 1895, Micah surprised Eleanor by taking her back to Marcus and Sarah's old property, where they had been married. The wildflowers were in bloom again, just as they had been on their wedding day, carpets of color stretching across the desert. "Do you remember?" Micah asked, holding her hand as they stood under the arch where they had exchanged vows, now weathered but still standing. "Every moment," Eleanor said. "Every word, every promise. And we've kept them all, haven't we?" "Every single one," Micah confirmed. He pulled her close and they swayed together as if dancing to music only they could hear. "I love you as much today as I did then. More even. You've given me everything, Eleanor. A home, a family, a purpose, a life worth living." "We gave that to each other," Eleanor corrected, echoing words he had once said to her. "And we're not done yet. We have years ahead of us, Micah. Years to watch our children grow, to grow old together, to keep building this life we've made." "I can't wait," Micah said, and kissed her there under the arch, surrounded by wildflowers and memories and the promise of all the tomorrows yet to come. Their children grew up strong and happy. Matthew became a skilled carpenter like his father, eventually taking over much of Micah's work as Micah grew older. Emma, spirited and independent, surprised everyone by becoming a teacher in Florence, following in the footsteps of Eleanor's father. Young Marcus showed an aptitude for ranching and began working with the larger cattle operations in the area, making a name for himself as someone honest and hardworking. Eleanor and Micah were blessed with grandchildren in time, and their cabin that had once been just the two of them became a gathering place for family. The table Micah had built was extended to accommodate everyone, and holiday celebrations were boisterous affairs filled with multiple generations. As they aged, Eleanor and Micah spent more time on their beloved porch, watching the sunsets and reminiscing about all they had experienced together. Eleanor's hair turned silver, and Micah's body bore the marks of a life spent in hard physical labor, but their love never dimmed. "Do you ever regret it?" Eleanor asked him one evening as they sat together, her head resting on his shoulder. "The life we built? I know it wasn't always easy." "Never," Micah said firmly. "Not for 1 second. Every challenge, every hardship was worth it for this. For you, for our family, for the life we made together. I wouldn't change a single thing." "Neither would I," Eleanor agreed, "though I still can't believe how it all started. A collapsed roof and a cowboy passing by at exactly the right moment." "Fate," Micah said with a smile. "It had to be fate, or luck, or courage. Maybe all three," Eleanor suggested. And Micah laughed, the sound as warm and familiar as home. When Eleanor was 70 years old and Micah 73, they celebrated their 48th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The gathering was held at the cabin that had weathered decades of storms and sun, its bones still strong, thanks to Micah's careful construction and their diligent upkeep. Matthew stood up to give a toast, his own hair graying now. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass, "who taught us what love looks like, what partnership means, what it means to build something that lasts. Thank you for everything you've given us, for the example you've set, and for the family you've created. We love you both." The words were echoed by everyone present, and Eleanor felt tears slip down her weathered cheeks. She looked around at all the faces, at the family she and Micah had brought into the world and raised with love and care. This was their legacy, not the cabin or the land or the material things they had accumulated, but these people, these connections, this love that would continue long after she and Micah were gone. "Speech!" someone called, and Micah helped Eleanor to her feet. "I'm not much for speeches," Eleanor began, her voice still strong despite her age. But I do want to say this. There was a time when I thought my life was over, when I was literally buried under the rubble of everything I had known. And then this stubborn cowboy dug me out and refused to let me give up. She smiled at Micah, who grinned back at her. He showed me that endings can be beginnings, that love can come when you least expect it, and that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst moments. All of you are proof of that. You are the joy that came from tragedy, the light that came from darkness. And I am grateful every single day that I was given a second chance to live and love. The room erupted in applause and more than a few tears. Micah stood and pulled Eleanor into his arms, holding her close as their family celebrated around them. That night, after everyone had gone home and it was just the two of them again, Eleanor and Micah lay in the bed he had carved for her so many years ago. The wood was worn smooth from decades of use, but it was still solid, still beautiful. "That was a good day," Eleanor said softly. "All our days have been good," Micah replied, "even the hard ones, because we faced them together." Eleanor shifted closer, tucking herself against his side in a position that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "I love you, Micah Harrison. Thank you for saving my life." "I love you too, Eleanor Harrison," Micah said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Thank you for giving me a life worth saving." They fell asleep like that, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful. The cabin stood strong around them, filled with memories and love, a testament to everything they had overcome and everything they had created together. Outside, the Arizona night was clear and bright with stars, the desert peaceful under the moon's gentle light. And in the cabin that had risen from the ruins of tragedy, two hearts beat in quiet harmony, bound together by love that had weathered every storm and would continue on, echoed in the generations they had brought into the world long after they had gone. Their story had begun with disaster and desperation, with a roof collapsing under the weight of an impossible snow and a cowboy who refused to pass by without stopping to help. But it had become so much more than that. It had become a life, a family, a love that proved that second chances are real, that hope can bloom even in the harshest conditions, and that sometimes the person who saves your life is really saving their own at the same time. Eleanor Preston Harrison and Micah Jackson. Harrison lived out their days in the home they had built together, surrounded by love and family, their bond unbreakable until death finally, peacefully, parted them in their sleep one winter night, their hands still clasped together, their final rest coming as it had always been, together, as partners, as lovers, as two halves of one remarkable whole. And the cabin stood on, sheltering the generations that came after, a monument to a love that began in the most unlikely of circumstances and proved that sometimes, when everything falls apart, it's simply to make room for something better to be built in its place.